Good morning, thank you. Good afternoon now, sorry. If we could get the first slide up. So I'm here, I'd like to talk to you about our friends, the machines. And two things I want to touch on. The first one is emotions, and then what changes in a generation. And just to kind of give you an example of that, if you go back to 1990, which was when I was one of the co-founders of ARM, it's when we started, and you look at an advert from Radio Shack, you'll see all of these devices you could buy. It includes a mobile phone, which of course meant a large box that you fitted in the boot or trunk of your car, hadn't actually got down to any level of miniaturization. And if you look at nearly all of those products on the front page, they were really analog consumer devices. And what's happened between then and now is the world has gone digital. And I'd like to talk about that transition and what I see coming in the next generation. So go forward 7 years from 1990, and ARM had shipped 10 million units. Nobody had heard of us. Nobody knew who we were, with the exception of Nokia. And Nokia launched the 6110, which for us was the first ARM-powered phone. It sort of transformed our business, as Nokia became in those days the #1 provider of mobile phones. And if you go forward another 10 years, you get to 2007, and we and our partners had shipped 10 billion units, and a few people knew who we were, and the first wave of the mobile revolution was over. And what came next, of course, was the launch of iPhone 1. If you run that forward another 10 years, you get to 2017. We've shipped 100 billion units, 50 billion of those in mobile phones, and 50 billion in absolutely everything else. And what's really happened in the next wave of mobile phones isn't just the integration of all of those analog devices now actually in your mobile phone. It's not just the translation from analog to digital. It's the fact that we have actually changed society, and you've now ended up with a mobile phone becoming a necessary part of human life. So society and the way it behaves and what it does has changed in what was a generation from 1990 through to 27. And the question is, what really happens in the next generation? So I asked my son, who's a college graduate studying mechanical engineering, just transitioning into doing product design, and I was going through his portfolio and thinking, what products is he designing today? What's he going to be looking back in another 27 years of the products that have come from what I think is the transition from digital into data? And going through his portfolio, what he started talking about was the role of emotions in user interface design and in product design. I thought, okay, that's cool. I've never talked about my emotions much. My wife says I'm really bad at talking about it. I think I'm quite good at expressing them sometimes, but I thought I'd try and talk about them a bit. And he introduced me to this guy called Robert, who kind of has a theory behind how you take the different emotions and you combine them to get all the subtleties that we see in human behavior, and currently we don't see in AI, machine learning, and the kind of robotics that we're going to talk about the rest of today. And I thought I'd start with trust. And this is a really important emotion, and if we don't have trust, then stories like this about all the things that can go wrong with your mobile phone and then your car actually stop consumers adopting technology. And we can do a lot at the hardware level, at the chip level, at the firmware level to build secure systems. And we're doing that, but if users don't trust that end device, then they're not actually going to see the deployment that we'd like to see. And an example of where we've gone from, analog to digital in a car and then the data revolution is if you look at those cars and you see tweets like this, here is someone who doesn't end up trusting necessarily the car or the company he bought from because they can't manage his data correctly. The car may have become unhackable, but if the company ends up not realizing that they have to manage the whole life cycle of a product, then you get tweets like this where someone is still being spammed because somebody else's car needs charging. And we all think it's important that we manage our data. And if you look at a survey done, you ask people, is it important who has control of your data? Would you give away your email addresses? How do you feel about that? Most people go, no, I wouldn't give away my email addresses. It's important who has access to my data. And all of that crumbles in the face of a pizza. Because we went to a study of MIT students, the wrong Cambridge, I come from the other one, and they were asked to give their mobile phone number of their best friend for the promise of free pizza. 98% of them did. They never got any pizza, it was just the promise of free pizza. So it doesn't matter if we make the chips secure, it doesn't matter if we get OEMs to actually treat people's data properly. If consumers don't do the right thing, we don't end up having this virtuous circle where people end up trusting the devices, which, like a mobile phone, they're going to become entirely dependent on. Next one, disgust. Now, you've seen earlier, videos like this of robots that are almost humans but not quite. And that gap between, while it's a cuddly robot, it's okay. When it tries to be a person but doesn't quite make it, you actually step back and there's that feeling of disgust. I think if you look forward a generation, these become things that will be indistinguishable from humans. The little subtleties that are missing from this are easy to fix. The technology plays out. But you don't need to have perfection. Because if you look at this clip, which seems like it's more out of a horror movie, it's actually a therapeutic robot to get autistic children to talk. The fact that it doesn't really feel like a human is the point of it. It means it's not threatening. To you it might look it, but to the autistic child, it's actually something they can relate to. So we don't need to make technology perfect in order to be able to drive mass adoption. Anticipation. What do I see coming? What do I think's changing? Well, for some geeks, the AlphaGo winning at chess was one of those machine learning transformations. It's quite geeky. It hasn't yet moved into transferable learning. I can play Go, but that doesn't mean I can play chess. There's a lot of development to come. And some people look at it and say, well, okay, what did it actually take to make that happen? Well, the answer is, for the human, about, a small hamburger to play a 3-4 hour game of Go. If you look what it took for AlphaGo to do that, then, 400 kilowatts. And that's like a 4,000 times difference. It seems really large today, but think back to 1990 and your mobile phone that was able to play Snake and make phone calls. What you can do on your mobile phone today, those differences are all going to get taken away, and it's going to come back to closer to parity, at which point what seems to be something that can run in a server ends up in something that can run in your client device, and from your client device, your phone, not long after that, it ends up running in the smoke detector that you've got on your ceiling. So things that you think of with machine learning, it all happens up in the cloud, and then we have to then go and run inference on our small devices. That is all changing. And we're moving to a distributed intelligence where it isn't cloud and client edge device. The computation will always happen in the cloud, but it's moving to also happen in the edge devices. There's going to be learning happening in those edge devices, as well as the actual inference and bringing action from it. And, what's driving that? You don't have the bandwidth to move all the data from your smoke alarm back up to the cloud to work out what's going on. You haven't got the power budgets to make that happen. If it's in your car, if it's in a robot you're interacting with, you don't have the latency in order to do that. You have to do it locally. And if you're concerned about the privacy and the security of the devices, the more you can keep the data close to you, then the more secure and the more privacy you can offer. Now, emotions are quite complicated things. So here, if you take fear and combine it with surprise, you get awe. And awe is what I felt when I looked at this. Now, this man is paraplegic. He's got a break in the upper vertebra of his spine, and therefore he is actually unable to control his limbs above his waist and his legs. And he's feeding himself. And if you look at the technology that took to do this, on his head, you can see two boxes. They are actually implanted electrodes into his brain, into the part of the cortex that does motor control. And he's got 36 stimuli fitted into his upper and his lower arm in order to activate his muscles because they're bypassing the break in his spine. He's able to actually control his hand and his wrist without any assistance, but after 8 years without being able to move, he's lost the muscle strength to actually be able to lift his arm unaided. So not only is his muscles being activated, there's also motors being activated in a robot to assist him to actually allow him to feed himself. So while we look at things as being a data problem, a robotics problem, I think what's happening with the combination of data, digital, and medical is also going to be quite transformative as to what products look like in the future. And so, you know, what's going to happen in the next 4 years? In the next 4 years, it's taken us 27 years of ARM to ship 100 billion units. In the next 4 years, there's going to be another 100 billion units shipped. 50 billion of those are going to be in mobile devices. The other 50 billion are in those smoke alarms, in your anti-lock brakes in your cars, in all of the IoT devices that are going to bring machine learning to the edge, which is going to enable autonomous vehicles, enable robots to actually become more and more lifelike and more productive in what they can do. And you know, that covers all of these different areas of development. And for me, I kind of feel like my son is sitting where I was back in 1990. There are all of these digital products now that are about to be transformed into data-driven products. They're going to become robots. They're going to become virtual reality. I don't know what the form factor is, and I don't think it's quite like the phone revolution, that all of those things are going to end up in one iconic form factor, which becomes the mobile phone. But what I do know is 27 years in a generation is a really long time in order to be able to make the engineering and the technology deliver on some of the things I've talked about, and that will transform how society works. We never knew in 1997 with that first Nokia mobile phone that it was going to be used as a medical device. It was going to enable micropayments in Africa. There are a whole bunch of applications and uses that we've never thought of that will come about from that transition from the digital age to the data-driven age. And a lot of that is going to be enabled by the machine learning that's actually going to transform the kind of products we use and the services and how we actually run our own companies. With that, thank you very much.